board consisting of Cy Kiani, Andy Nishioka, Paul Skierma, Jonathan Reeve, and Jay Finch provides an annual dose of togetherness and mental nourishment. They listened to me ramble on about my project, debated the finer points with incisive wit, and rooted for me year after year. And that's absolutely true. I don't know if you all remember talking about my dissertation or talking about the entire process that led to this book, but I remember those conversations well. And then I want to read this extra sentence here because it means a lot to me. It meant a lot to me when I put the sentence in, which is that Cy and Andy have been brothers to me for so long that they should think of the book as partially their own. All right.
Hear, hear.
I've got two quick passages. Well, I don't know if they're quick, but two things that I want to read. One is set up. I want to set the first one up by talking about. The first sentence says, an awareness of the gap between experience and expression.
It was me.
An awareness of the gap between experience and expression. The gap between experience and expression refers to the fact that Curt Flood, of course who the book is about, Curt Flood's experiences as a black man led him to believe one thing, but which is that he felt that he was victimized through his blackness as being he was victimized and was sort of cast as a martyr in Major League Baseball. And that was his experience. But his expression was that he would sort of allude to the fact that he felt victimized by his blackness, but would never put it in those terms. He would always talk about the fact that how his fight would benefit everyone, black players and white players included. So that's the setup for this passage. An experience of this gap between experience and expression helps in diagnosing the nostalgic excess that frustrates the search for critical memory in the present. The 6th chapter fits Flood into sport's current public memory and explains the variety of ways in which he is trapped within the contradictions of the black activist athlete's purported demise. Here, I argue that the relationship of co-optation that doomed Flood in the early 1970s manifests now in an anxiety that struggles to discover and reanimate the black activist athlete as a subject of public address and agent of history. Where are our black activist athletes now? They may or may not be around, and despite the hegemonic effacement of race crystallized for many in Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan, black athletes unquestionably cannot be condemned as a class. But the call to conscience, as it is issued today, often takes such anxious form, asking athletes to speak out for something in exasperation over their inability to speak truth to power, that one wonders whether liberalism has put itself in this position, and whether what passes as critical memory too often merely speaks its own psychosis through the subject position that has worked historically to sustain its political logic. As far as the black athlete is concerned, it seems, liberalism is left only to devour its young. You like that, don't you?
I like hegemonic effacement.
And then here's my second favorite passage, and this comes from toward the end of the book. I'm criticizing the loss of the activist athlete. There are two authors in particular who've written recent books, Sean Powell and Bill Rhoden, and both Powell and Rhoden complain about what they call the demise of the activist athlete. And Powell is really sort of finger-wagging and angry, and he basically says that the model of black fatherhood in America is Richard Williams and Earl Woods, and he complains that current black athletes the title of his book is Sold Out. He complains that current black athletes are sellouts. And then Bill Rhoden describes black athletes as, quote-unquote, abdicating their responsibilities to their communities with treasonous vigor. So he calls black athletes traitors to their communities, and I think that that's unfair. And
Are
so
those two authors white or black?
they are both black. And so this is my response to Powell and Rhoden. And this summarizes, this is one of the last paragraphs in the last chapter of the book. So this is what I say about Powell. I think I'm addressing Powell specifically here. But, so here it is. Several tensions appear in Sold Out. Given a choice, writes Powell, I'd rather have the eye of America trained on the legions of blacks from all walks who nourish children elevate their communities, and show a willingness to mesh comfortably into the mainstream while staying true to their heritage, unquote. Maybe this is what Harry Edwards was after, or maybe not, but Powell seems committed to a notion of the mainstream that Harry Edwards, who was one of the prominent black radicals in 1968, that Harry Edwards might not have welcomed in his kind of scene. My point here is not to measure Powell's verdicts on contemporary activism against the truth of the revolt model of black activism, but to reveal with the story of the activist athlete's demise finds its own limits. If those troublingly incoherent canons of black athletes ought to be modeled in civic spirit, then surely they took us somewhere we are supposed to measure as progress. But if progress's cash value is mere cash, the liberal politics of representation retains only the power to blame the victims of progress for treachery and abandonment. The black athlete who appeared in vivid synecdoche on campus and in pro locker rooms in 1969 has transformed in public memory into a hesitant hoarder of cash, especially when images of Mexico City arise. Quote, Smith and Carlos were black athletes of a different era, cut from a different mold, because money is most certainly on the mind of a typical professional black athlete today. He has a comfortable standard of living, a fair degree of fame, a healthy amount of respect from the public, and because he doesn't want to jeopardize any of that, he also has a severe case of laryngitis, unquote. In its simplest terms, symbolic representation is a matter of who gets to stand for black identity. But when liberal integrationism shattered the activist mold over an anvil of economic opportunity, a process said to have originated with Curtis Charles Flood, the critics were left with nothing else but to wag their fingers at spoiled children. They seemed to want someone to voice the spirit of our age. But perhaps Jordan and Woods, as our craven sellouts, do in fact voice the spirit of our age just as succinctly as Jackie Robinson once did. Flood's history as a subject of public address demonstrates that the past that never was, in which our lost luminaries revolutionized sports political vocabulary, really never was. Nevertheless, accusations of etherization, selfishness, triviality, and malign neglect abound, and the radicals are no more upon us than before.
Well, duh.
So those are my two favorite passages. One where I lay out the problem, and one where I critique Powell and Roden.
Love it.
Very nice.
Would you like to collect your books now?
I do.
Yeah, I need to get the new tape.
Okay.
I was telling Abe, this is not